Sometimes I listen to podcasts, but the only actual podcasts I found myself listening to are YouTuber podcasts like Creepcast or Chuckle Sandwich, rest in peace. Recently, I found myself listening to Smosh podcasts, and on one of those podcasts, Shane Top of Smosh said this.
Especially when you're one of the top podcasts on YouTube.
Just
and
me
Spotify.
and Tucker Carlson. It's a crazy top 10.
And it got me thinking, it can't be that bad. Right? I am really unfamiliar with most podcasts. Out of the top 20, only one of these I've actually listened to a full episode of. Most of these I've never heard once. So I decided I'm going to listen to all of them from number 20 to number 1. Each podcast's most recent episode at the time of recording. Because the charts are constantly fluctuating, I'm going to be listening to these podcasts back to back, and I'm kind of curious what would happen to me. Like what happens to my mental state. I took a screenshot on August 4th, which is the day I decided to start doing this. We'll be skipping the one in the number 19 spot because it's technically not a podcast, more of a live music performance thing. So that means we're starting with number 21. What's funny is the day after I started, it refreshed and was a lot closer to what I'm actually doing, but whatever. It's fine. Okay, first podcast. The Journal. So this wasn't a terrible start. The Journal is basically just the Wall Street Journal's daily podcast where they devote an episode to one specific story. It's kind of like an audio documentary. The episode I listened to was about a German AI investor who was deemed the Nostradamus of AI, had a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund built for him, which then crashed, which made him fall into an enormous amount of debt at the same time that he was preparing for his wedding. So I definitely wasn't bored. This was a good start because it was only 20 minutes and it wasn't boring. I probably won't listen to it ever again though. Okay, next up. Call Her Daddy. So this is the first interview podcast, which is what the majority of these are going to be. Before listening to this, I had no idea who Alex Cooper was, but for the most part, this is her thing. She's a podcaster, and she hosts a podcast where she has celebrities on. The episode I listened to had Janelle Monáe, which is also a name that I wasn't familiar with beforehand. I think I recognize her face, but I don't know from where. In the episode of Call Her Daddy that I listened to, they talked about Janelle's most recent album, trauma, therapy, dating, relationships, and sex. It was a very therapy speak and serious kind of podcast. Now, since this is an interview podcast, I can't judge it by this one episode, but I was not in the right headspace for therapy talk, let me tell you. It wasn't necessarily bad, I just wasn't interested in the conversation. I looked at the descriptions of some of the other episodes, and it looks like the majority of the discussions on this podcast are the relationships, trauma, and human experience kind of discussions, which I think those are important conversations to have. I just thought it was boring to listen to other people have those conversations. I don't have any problems with this podcast. It's just another instance of I probably won't listen to this ever again. All right, Giggly Squad. So this was fun. I don't think I'm the target demographic though. It kind of felt like I was sitting in a quiet corner at a party overhearing a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with me, but I'm still having a good time anyways. Giggly Squad is a podcast hosted by Hannah Berner and Paige DeSorbo. Yet again, didn't know who they were till listening to this podcast. Apparently they're reality TV stars from the reality TV show Summer House, which I have not seen, so the name's not a lie. They do giggle a lot. It was kind of just light background noise, which is the kind of podcast I find myself listening to anyways. I actually did some chores listening to this, so heck yeah. The stuff they talked about isn't the kind of stuff that I'd normally find myself listening to, but it's the way that they talked about it that made it entertaining. Like, I don't care about fake tans and BBLs, but to these podcasters, everything is hilarious. And that's definitely not boring. This is a total nitpick, but the only thing that actually bothered me is they were saying hyperfixation casually, which is a little pet peeve of mine. People use the word hyperfixation to refer to interests. But interests are a choice? Hyperfixation is a medical term used to refer to potential symptoms of ADHD, autism, and OCD. It was just a little annoying. I'm being nitpicky though. Again, not the stuff I'd normally be interested in, but these are reality TV stars, so they know how to entertain. Okay. Bad Friends. Alright, I turned on a fan because it is 100 degrees where I am. It's so hot. So this is like the podcast I just listened to, but with dudes. I am vaguely familiar with the hosts. I know the name Bobby Lee, but I didn't know of Andrew Santino. Probably said that wrong. I knew Bobby Lee from that one clip with the... Bobby. No, you don't have to... I know that. I remember that. Bobby. That's funny. I think that was Theo Vaughn, which is also a guy I have to listen to. I didn't really laugh at all. There were probably some inside jokes I didn't get. Same with the Giggly Squad podcast. Like Giggly Squad, this podcast was entertaining, and I was not bored. They're stand-up comedians after all, so they were telling stories from their life and stuff. It was just another instance of me feeling like I was walking into a room with a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with me. The stuff they talked about and the way they talked about it was stuff that I just never really engage with or even think about. They're just very different for me, and I don't want to be like, oh, it's an age thing. But I think it might be an age thing. I have a feeling the target demographic of this podcast is older dudes, because they talked about older dude stuff, and the way that they talked about young people in the future was very much in an older dude way. The top comment of this episode on Spotify was this. Like, come on. Some of the stuff they were saying about technological progression and AI was like the exact opposite of the opinions I expressed in the video I literally just made, that technology keeps progressing faster and AI is moving us forward. Both of which I strongly disagree with. And then the rest of the podcast was just like, jack it off, am I right? Comedy is subjective, and this podcast has a really big following, so I think some people find them funny, but I don't. All right, next. Whoa! I already watched this episode a few days ago, and it was a banger. This particular episode had Shane Topp, the host of the podcast, Courtney Miller, and Amanda Lehan Canto. I don't know why I felt the need to say it like that. Amanda from Smosh has become incredibly unhinged. You can literally never predict what she's gonna say next. This is actually one of my favorite episodes they've done. I liked the girl dinner gimmick, where they only read stories from the girl dinner subreddit, which is a subreddit where women seek advice from other women, and they post a photo of whatever meal they're eating. Not only were the stories super interesting, but everyone was really funny. It's not perfect because it's an unscripted podcast where they have to come up with takes in the moment, and sometimes they'll say something that's just a little out there, and the comment section will absolutely destroy them. It's a great show, though. I'm almost constantly having to process something insane, whether it's a part of the story or one of Amanda's jokes. Next story, my dad who's 50 is dating a 23-year-old. That's an actual story from the episode. Great show. Anyways, what's next? Oh. So this was really hard for me to get through. Regardless of Candace Owens' controversial reputation, I just don't like how she talks. It just rubs me the wrong way. She's constantly doing this thing where she's befuddled and confused, but not actually. She's being sarcastic. It's not funny. It's so annoying. It seems so forced. Also, every single one of these podcast episodes is about Charlie Kirk's assassination. I'm sure this is what her audience will click on, but geez. There's other stuff going on. I'm sure there's something else you can talk about. I get she's upset, but it's been so long at this point. It's almost been a year. I just don't know what else there is to say about it. Conspiracy theories. That's kind of her thing. I was so annoyed while listening to this. Not even because of what she was saying. I didn't care. She just annoys me. I don't know how she has such a big audience. Like, how is she in the top 20? It's an almost daily podcast where she talks about the exact same thing over and over and over. I'm convinced that the people that watch Candace Owens are not real. They're all fake. They're all just figments of my imagination. As long as I could convince myself they're not real, they're not. Nobody watches Candace Owens.
There's no war in Ba Sing Se.
It's so insane that this is even in the top 20. I knew of Candace Owens, but I didn't know her podcast was like this. Obviously, I don't want to be insensitive. It's very sad that Charlie Kirk was killed. No one deserves to die for spreading their thoughts and opinions. I just haven't thought about Charlie Kirk outside of memes in so long that it is genuinely kind of shocking to me that this is as popular as it is. But the internet is huge, and I don't listen to conspiracy theory podcasts. I'm seeing outside of my bubble, discovering something new, which is great. Even if what I'm seeing is hard to believe I'm seeing with my own eyes. Yeah, great podcast. I'll be a daily listener now. I can't wait to hear whatever update there is on the Charlie Kirk conspiracy theories. Anyways, pardon my take. I'm going to be completely honest. I stopped listening to this podcast halfway through. I am okay with being bored or annoyed because I can actually get something out of that. But I can't stand being confused. I'm not a sports guy. I never have been. I tried like every sport as a kid and I've just never been athletic. I also just don't do well at team activities. I can focus by myself. I just can't with other people because I just want to socialize. That's part of why I'm making YouTube videos. I work best by myself even though I love working with other people. I just become less efficient, I guess. I think sports is interesting. I just don't have many sports lovers in my life. And I just haven't ever really gotten into it. I might in the future, but right now, Listening to a sports podcast is incredibly hard. I was constantly looking stuff up because I genuinely know nothing. PFT, MLB trade deadline, different team names and players and whether or not they're doing well. Which, if you're the type of person that's into sports, none of this would be confusing. It was just information overload for me. They were talking about what they were excited about in baseball, and I was so lost. I felt like a little kid at the family barbecue and your distant sports-loving relatives are there. They did talk about other stuff for a bit around the middle, but they went back to baseball, and I was so lost I just couldn't listen anymore. Someday I might understand sports, because I know it's a really big thing. There's just so much to it, and I'm so far behind that it's kind of daunting. Okay, moving on. The Tim Dillon Show. So this wasn't that bad. It was kind of like GTA talk radio, which is a backhanded compliment, but Tim Dillon is a comedian, and he kind of just talks about stuff that's happening, stuff he finds annoying. It's entertaining. If somebody told me that they liked Tim Dillon, I wouldn't be offended, because there's much worse stuff to be listening to. He's kind of John Podcaster. Like, when I imagine a podcaster, this is the guy that pops up in my brain. Stereotypical Bass Pro Shops loving conservative. His studio is so funny. It actually looks like he just set up in a Bass Pro Shops. Most of the episode was just him complaining about influencers, which is something that I think the majority of people can get behind. I think out of all these people so far, outside of Smosh, I'd be the most okay with being in the same room as this guy. He reminds me of a lot of people I just already know. Like, if I'm ever at a family gathering out in the middle of the country, there's like 4 of this guy. He's not necessarily a great role model, but again, he's just inoffensive to me. I doubt I will be listening to this again, though. Morbid. I enjoyed this. It was good. I'm not usually big on true crime stuff, but I thought this was interesting. It wasn't just here's something horrible that happened. It was a discussion of everything surrounding the horrible thing. I'm not really familiar with the hosts Ash Kelly and Elena Urquhart? That's definitely wrong. I think this is their main thing, though, but this was enjoyable. I did my laundry while listening to it. The story was about an unsolved murder in Toronto, where an older couple was found dead while a realtor was showing their house to a younger couple. It was interesting. Kind of mad I got an unsolved case, though. Was it a murder-suicide? Were they both murdered by someone? Did they both commit suicide? Freak accident, maybe? I don't know. Anyways, that's the only one so far that I can actually see myself revisiting, because it was surprisingly relaxing despite the subject matter. Now for the news. Up first from NPR is just generic news. Whatever you think of when you think of news, it's this. The episode I listened to was about a primary election in Michigan, U.S. missiles stockpiles running low, and a new flu vaccine. None of this is interesting to me. It's literally the kind of stuff you hear on the news every single time you open it. And honestly, I just really don't like the news. It makes me feel so negative. Thankfully, this was only 13 minutes, but yeah, it was the news. Next up. So, new rule. If it's a guest-based podcast, I get to pick the episode. This was really difficult for me to get through. It was a solid podcast, it just wasn't super interesting to me. Armchair Expert is hosted by actors Dax Shepard and Monica Padman. They have on celebrities and others to talk about the human experience. Interesting premise. I just wish I had listened to an episode about a person that I already find interesting. The guest was Christopher Whitcomb, who is a former FBI hostage rescue team sniper, best-selling author, and national security analyst. He mainly talked about the FBI's elite hostage rescue team, as well as other stuff from his life. This is great and all, but put yourself in my shoes for a moment. Podcast 11. 9 more to go. 2 hours of listening to 3 people I've never heard of talk about something I don't care about. This podcast was the turning point where I realized I really, really regretted doing 20 podcasts. I was so tired. I still kind of am. 10 podcasts would have been so much more doable, but despite my desire to do literally anything else, I was committed to finishing this. Look at this guy. Look at those dark circles. I didn't sleep well. Probably because I stayed up late listening to podcasts, and then I woke up the next morning, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do that again. I felt like I was stuck in a time loop. It felt like Groundhog Day. And not to mention, the video I uploaded before this, I accidentally scheduled it to upload a day later, so that didn't help to me feeling like I was stuck in a time loop. It is currently 4 p.m. on a Wednesday.
Whose idea was this? It's almost like it was mine. It's almost like I chose to do this.
I never want, I don't want to listen to a podcast ever again. I don't know why I'm mumbling right now. I get it right out of the words because my brain is getting fried. Dude, I have so many more to go. This whole experience was so disorienting. It was way harder than watching the 10 worst rated movies because it was 10. It wasn't 20. I wasn't constantly having it injected into my ears. This was an almost constant thing. I mean, obviously I gave myself breaks, but there was this like impending doom. This has to be considered a form of self-harm. This is not good. I can't be doing this. I think it's important to make yourself do things you don't want to do, but when the thing you don't want to do is harmful to your mental state, it's significantly harder. I was listening to these podcasts and writing down my thoughts back to back to back over 3 days. I remember being like 3/4 of the way through the episode and considering not finishing it, but finishing it anyways because I was almost done. I didn't really do a good job of listening though, if I'm being completely honest. But from this point forward, I pick the guest, so I'm actually engaged. Okay, next. Okay, so I immediately broke my new rule. This isn't like a celebrity personality interview podcast, but it's more focused on stuff like business, politics, the economy, and sometimes religion. So I didn't really feel the need to pick a person. I really liked watching and listening to this. I like how they talked about actual issues and covered such a wide variety of topics. The host of the show is Steven Bartlett, a British entrepreneur. In the most recent episode, as of recording this, he discusses issues with Pete I'm not saying it. The topics they covered are some of the issues that I find myself learning about and thinking about the most, like political division, wealth inequality, AI, capitalism versus socialism, lots of politics stuff. So it was really nice to have this big, deep dive into all of it. And Pete Booty Man, his takes on things seemed reasonable enough. A lot of the comments were saying he's a puppet, but I don't know, man. I'm not that big on politics, so I just don't. This is my first time seeing this guy. He seemed all right. The whole podcast was very chill. They were discussing important and serious topics in a very chill way, and I appreciated that. But the comments on like every episode of this show, specifically on Spotify, are so nasty. The YouTube ones weren't as bad, but I guess this podcast isn't normally dealing with politics, and it's such a touchy subject that no matter what you say, somebody's gonna get upset. I enjoyed this podcast. I was a lot more interested than I was expecting. All right, moving on. That was fun. It was also the most dude podcast I've ever listened to. I'm actually kind of familiar with Shane Gillis and Matt McCusker, especially Shane Gillis. About a year ago, I watched his Netflix comedy special, and I thought it was pretty funny. I also saw that episode of Kill Tony where Matt and Shane came on and did Biden and Trump impressions. That was also funny, even though I'm not the hugest fan of Tony Hinchcliffe. He's just annoying. Sorry, Tony Hinchcliffe enjoyers. I'm just not a fan of him at all. Shane Gillis has this kind of guy's guy persona that is surprisingly funny. I don't know how to explain it. I just think he's funny. Matt McCusker is also funny, and he also has that dude bro thing going on. I don't really have a problem with either of these guys, but I don't really seek them out either. The podcast episode I listened to was a bit different from what they normally do, because they had 2 other guys on that I didn't bother looking up, because one of them was literally just listed as Billy. I'm assuming they're stand-up comedians, though. So yeah, this was fun. I was kind of half listening while doing other things, because they were kind of just talking about random stuff, mainly rock music. Anyways, more news. So this was a lot like The Journal from the Wall Street Journal, but I thought it was a lot better. It's another daily podcast that every day they put out a story on a specific topic. The episode I listened to was on Arizona's food stamp crisis, where a lot of people who need food stamps to afford basic necessities are getting dropped from it because of stricter rules. This is happening everywhere, but this podcast specifically talked about Arizona. I thought this was really interesting, and I can see why it's as popular as it is. Like The Journal, this also had a documentary feel to it with the music, sound effects, and interview style. They also linked a read-along thing on their website, but I don't have an account, so I didn't use it. It's just neat that it exists. Neat podcast. Anyways, Theo Von. So I finally got to pick an episode. I scrolled for a bit and realized that I didn't care about any of these guests, so I just picked one that I vaguely recognized and I didn't know from where. Turns out he's from Kill Tony, which I don't know how I remember that. I haven't watched an episode of Kill Tony in so long. I didn't despise listening to this, but I don't think I'm the target audience. I think it's much more of your stereotypical country-loving conservative, but I still thought it was a decent podcast. I think it was because I got an episode that was very much not political. Thank heavens. Apparently he's had Trump on, which is crazy. Anyways, I don't know. Theo Von was fine. I have basically no opinions on the guy. All right, next. I enjoyed this way more than I should have. Maybe it's because it was the final stretch on the final day, and I gave myself some time before I got started again. But I had fun. Amy Poehler is funny. I don't know much about her besides that she's in Parks and Recreation, but she's funny in that show. I picked the John Cena episode. If I had a nickel for... I can't do a Doofenshmirtz. If I had a nickel for every time I talked about John Cena on this channel, I'd have 2 nickels. which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Out of all the podcasts I've had to listen to, this one was the most wholesome. Just John Cena talking about his childhood. At one point, he stood up and touched his toes. It was silly. And I liked how light it was, especially with the much more serious podcasts coming up. It was a little break. I can actually see myself revisiting this one because it was funny. It was lighthearted. It was very good background noise. The title wasn't a lie. It was a good hang. Besides Smosh Reads Reddit Stories, I think this was my favorite out of all of them. When it comes to podcasts, I tend to be more drawn to the sillier, less serious stuff because I don't want to be listening to doom and gloom all day. I like a serious talk every once in a while, but I'm much more likely to be in the mood for something like this. At the beginning of the podcast, they also had on Cody Rhodes, another wrestler, and he was also very entertaining, even though he was only talking for like 10 minutes, probably because they didn't get enough footage with John Cena. Out of all these podcasts, this one's also the most family friendly. This was just incredibly wholesome. I had fun. A great start to day 3. Okay, what's next? Okay. This was another difficult listen. At first I was okay because, haha, it's the guy who said, the green M&M you will notice is no longer wearing sexy boots. What are we doing? What's going on? I'm more familiar with Tucker Carlson as a character, like a concept of a person, so I kind of forgot he, actually has an audience. The podcast episode I listened to was a bit different from his usual. Normally he'd have somebody on to talk about political issues and stuff, but this time it was just him. And there weren't specific topics in the title, it was just, it's time to save America. The whole thing kind of played out with these bullet points of what Tucker thinks America should be. And at the beginning he was calling out the corrupt system in America. He was saying the corrupt system that only benefits the corporate elites is bad and doomed to fail. Which, yeah, I just really struggled with taking him seriously because, he's Tucker Carlson. The green M&M, you will notice, is no longer wearing sexy boots. She's now wearing sensible sneakers. I will never not find that funny. I hope someday he can find an M&M that he's attracted to. I wasn't expecting him to be religious, which is not that surprising because a lot of right-wing political speakers are religious.
An Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy? Probably equal.
Because out of all of these so far, the only other one that brought up religion was the Candace Owens one. And Candace Owens is just constantly doing her best Tucker Carlson impression. That was nasty. That was a lot. Did I really? I also wasn't expecting him to talk about immigration at the end, which I should have done my research. That's one of the main things that pops up when you look up Tucker Carlson. He's big on restrictions for immigration. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I think it was kind of funny how defensive he was about it. He kept on saying, it's not racist. It's not, there's no race stuff. It's not racist. I'm not racist. The whole time. The podcast was interesting. He did have some points that were good. Obviously, America is way too divided right now, which that's what the whole podcast was about. And I appreciate how the majority of the comments were, we're all in this together kind of stuff. Even though some of the comments were a little loony, a little wacky. Again, different side of the internet that I'm not used to. But yeah, this was a difficult listen because it was heavy and I couldn't get behind everything he was saying. Okay, true crime podcast. Yeah, huzzah. I actually got kind of invested into this. I wasn't familiar with the hosts of the podcast, Ashley Flowers and Britt So I don't recommend trying to record a YouTube video in the middle of the night. But here I am. We're going to do the final 3 now. Huzzah! Also, I ran out of storage. So that was part of the reason why I stopped. But once I was done, I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I'm so tired. Similar to the Morbid podcast, I'm pretty sure this is their main thing. This was also just a lot like Morbid. They're kind of the same podcast, but this one was a bit more interesting to me, at least the episode that I listened to. I'm not usually into true crime, but I thought this story was quite fascinating. The story I listened to was about a missing woman whose husband claimed that she left for a work trip that never happened. And then there were just so many lies from the husband to literally everyone involved with the case. The case is apparently still unsolved, so they don't know exactly what happened, but I think he absolutely had something to do with it. He lied so many times. He lied to his daughter about what happened to her mom. He lied to the authorities. He claimed he had amnesia specifically for the time that would have been important for the case. That's not suspicious at all. Every single time he told his story, it was different. Different times, different dates. It's just a crazy story. It happened in 1989, and the case was just recently brought back with the woman's husband being questioned some more. Just a wacky story with so many holes. Great podcast. I don't really have any complaints. I had a good time. Okay, we're down to the final 2. The Shawn Ryan Show. So I was really trying to find an episode of this that I would be interested in, and also wasn't 4 hours long. I scrolled for so long. Eventually, I decided to go to YouTube and sort by most popular because who knows, maybe I'll find something there. And I kind of lucked out. There's one episode from August of 2024. It's only an hour long, and he interviews Trump. I think this might be the shortest podcast episode he has, so this was a pretty easy decision. The length of some of these podcast episodes are wild. I saw one that's 12 hours. That is quite literally sun up to sundown. Okay, before I talk about the podcast, I just want to point out how funny these thumbnails are. Everyone always looks a little constipated. I was chuckling to myself while scrolling through these. It kind of reminds me of those images posted by the White House that had Trump and JD Vance, and they look like evil overlords or something. Like that's what they wanted to look like. It is so hard for me to take someone seriously if they are trying really hard to look cool. Anyways, Trump. This particular episode of the Shawn Ryan Show was shot off-site. I watched some clips of some of the other episodes, and it is pretty much the same thing, whether it's in studio or not. Shawn Ryan's main occupation is podcaster, but he used to be a Navy SEAL. All right, I'm gonna be completely honest. At this point of listening to these podcasts, my brain was completely fried. I was having such a hard time listening to Trump saying the same sort of stuff he always does. The radical left, the liberal media. And then my favorite quote from the episode, as far as women are concerned, I think they like me.
You know why they like me? Because I'm going to give them safety and security. I'm going to give them safety at the border. We're going to have a closed border. You know,
I like making fun of Donald Trump. Like most people, I don't like him at all. But the way he acts, or at least the way he used to act because he's becoming more of a zombie day after day, is pretty funny. So Shawn Ryan, again, with these podcasters, I just don't have an opinion. Like, I watched the episode and I'm like, it's a guy. I feel the same way about him as I do Theo Vaughn. He's just a guy. They're just the guys that ask the questions to the famous people on the podcast. There's nothing that I really like about them, but I also don't dislike them, I guess. Okay, last podcast. So like the Shawn Ryan Show, almost every single episode of the Joe Rogan Experience is like 3 hours long. So I just kind of sucked it up and said, whatever, I'll just listen to a full episode. And I decided to watch the episode with Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, because out of the most recent episodes, it had the most views. So I watched it, and I went and ran some errands while listening to it so it wouldn't be as daunting, especially with how much I struggled with the Armchair Expert podcast. So I've never actually watched an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience until now. I think Joe Rogan is a decent host. Like, he's entertaining. I don't think he's the greatest comedian, and I'm not necessarily the fondest of him as a person, but he knows how to hold a conversation in a way that's entertaining for an audience. I wasn't expecting him and JD Vance to get along as well as they did. Maybe that's how it is with every guest, but they were joking around for most of the podcast until like a third of the way through when they started talking about politics and stuff. They were talking about how they think California sucks. They were talking about comedy and absolutely glazing Tony Hinchcliffe for some reason. Ain't no way Tony Hinchcliffe came up 3 times in this video. You know what? Well, it makes sense. I'm listening to mostly the people that hang around Tony Hinchcliffe. So they also did the same thing as Tucker Carlson, where they talked about immigration at the end. This time it wasn't surprising because I realized right-wing politicians just do that. You learn something new every day, I guess. Well, I mean, I did know. I just didn't think about it, I guess. I did listen to most of this on 2x speed so I could actually get it done. But I got it done. I listened to all the podcasts. I'm so tired. Get a load of this guy. Thank you for watching. The 2.5 days I did this weren't necessarily good, but I'm glad I did it. I didn't really learn much. This is more of just like a, what would happen if you listen to the top podcasts all at once, rather than like, ooh, I learned something. I didn't really learn anything. Like, I learned I never want to do this again. Anyways, like the subscribe. What?